What's up guys, my name is Colin, this is The Battle Bridge, and today we're talking about Star Trek Picard Episode 4.
Engaging auto evasion protocols.
That old heap's targeting system is primitive, but the planetary security net worries me.
Just get us the hell out of here.
Now for this post-episode review, reaction, or analysis, I'm going to do things a little differently. I'm going to go through everything I liked about the episode and everything I didn't like about the episode in a rapid-fire manner. So let's get things started on a positive note and talk about everything in Star Trek Picard Episode 4 that I loved, starting with the appearance of 7 of 9. Yes, we knew this was coming, and yes, her appearance was oh so brief, but it was also oh so sweet. A beloved character from Star Trek past who isn't from TNG, her appearance on the show is a welcome one, and there's really not much else to say other than I'm looking forward to see how they use her character in Picard. Now speaking of Picard himself, next up is Patrick Stewart. Now if I proceed with this good, bad, hate it, loved it sort of theme in my forthcoming Picard reviews, I have a feeling Patrick Stewart is going to be in every single one of them under the good category. His performance in this episode was no less than his performance in the previous 3. The delivery, the screen presence, it carried the episode, frankly. When he delivers that line about possibly never passing this way again when he wants to go to Vashti, oh, got me right in the feels. Patrick Stewart and the character of Picard is, well, as you'd expect, what this entire show revolves around. And I don't just mean plot-wise. Because while I don't necessarily love every decision the show is making, every new character, every plot point, I do love Patrick Stewart. Now, if you're a glass half empty kind of person, you might actually put this in the bad category for the later half of this video. Because after all, an entire show carried by one character and one actor is probably not a successful show. That's not to say, of course, that in Picard specifically, there's nothing else of value except for this character and this actor. In fact, speaking of characters that I like, Dr. Jurati. Now, this is a brand new character for Star Trek Picard, and she's been in the show since episode 1, and she is by far my favorite of the newbies. Why? Well, she is just so Star Trek. She is a scientist, she's intelligent, she's kind, she's quirky, she's not a grizzled veteran Federation pilot or an ex-Romulan secret police assassin. Now, moving away from characters in the show to crew, here's something I liked. Jonathan Frakes directing. As you guys know, Jonathan Frakes has made multiple contributions to the Star Trek franchise, not the least of which is his portrayal of William Riker. But beyond that character, he is beloved for his directorial work on TNG and elsewhere. When you see directed by Jonathan Frakes pop up, well, you gotta smile if you're a Star Trek fan. Now in this show, Picard himself is presented as a bit of an antique, but that's nothing compared to one of the starships we were treated to in episode 4. That is the Romulan old-style bird of prey. Now this was fun to see for 2 reasons. One, we got a goddamn space encounter. We haven't had a single one of those, save for the flashbacks, in the entirety of this new series. It is Star Trek after all, right? And 2, it was a tremendous callback, again, not just to TNG, but this time to TOS, to the original series. You know, it's actually just such a cool thing to see an old-style ship in action in this show, because in most Star Treks, they focus on the Federation, who are obviously using cutting-edge technology, and were usually positioned on a hero ship, like the Galaxy-class Enterprise, like Voyager, like the Defiant. And these ships are new, they're cutting-edge, they're dangerous, and they usually square off against ships of similar design from other powers in the Alpha and Beta Quadrant and beyond. So we rarely get an opportunity to see truly outdated, truly outclassed ships outside of episodes that deal with time travel. So the Romulan Warbird, pretty cool. Now speaking of Romulans, one of my favorite things about this episode was the amount of diversity, genetic diversity we saw in the Romulan population. If you guys have watched my previous 2 reviews of Star Trek Picard, I got a little fixated on the portrayals, the physiological changes in Romulans. I was a little confused initially when Picard's 2 Romulan caregivers had the smooth foreheads we're used to seeing in TOS, but not the pronounced cranial ridges that TNG gave us. Now we did get a little tidbit in the previous episode, that is episode 3, that people from the northern hemisphere of Romulus are more predisposed to having those cranial ridges, and maybe that means people from the south aren't. Now this episode took it a step further, because when we go to Vashti and we see all the Romulan refugees, they all look different. They have different kinds of ridges, no ridges, different kinds of eyebrows, obviously very different hairstyles, clothing styles, and that just hits home the diversity of Romulan genetics. After all, they're just a race like anything else. Not all humans look the same. Obviously, not all Romulans are going to look the same either. And it didn't just end with genetics either. We saw a little cultural diversity when it came to the Kuat Milat, the warrior nuns, who exercised some cultural traits that were really antithetical to what we've been told about Romulans so far. It just rounds them out and fleshes out the whole mythos around Romulans, makes them a little more realistic as a people. Couple quick tidbits that I liked before we move on to stuff that I didn't. Apparently, you can walk and be transported now. Now this is a nice touch because it tells us that technology has advanced a little bit since we last saw Jean-Luc Picard. It's a little bit of world building that I appreciated. I also appreciated the call out to the paperback books. Obviously, by the 24th century, paper books are a luxury good, a specialty, an antique. And honestly, we're not that far away from that reality right now. Finally, going back to Picard, I loved his rebuke at Elnor for killing that Romulan senator and his thugs. At first, I was really disappointed that they had Elnor basically just murder those people right in front of Picard. That is not what Star Trek is about. Jean-Luc Picard has always valued life, no matter if it's the life of an enemy, a sentient android, or anything else, above everything. He has always prized the intrinsic rights of living beings. So to see people be murdered in such a sort of careless and gruesome way in a Star Trek show did bother me. However, just minutes later, they did make up for that by having Picard go full captain. In fact, full admiral on Elnor, ordering him never to use that kind of lethal force unless he ordered it and it was absolutely necessary. I also really like that little spark we saw of the old in-command Picard in that moment. The Jean-Luc that we've been getting in the Picard series is obviously markedly different from the one from TNG. Probably a big reason for that is that he hasn't been in command of anything for quite a number of years. But to see that little spark, that flare-up of Captain Picard, well, it felt familiar, needed, and wanted. Now, this would be a good point to move on to the things from episode 4 that I did not like. I told you how much I appreciated that spark of captaincy, of authority in Picard. Well, for the same reason, I really didn't care for the opening scene of this episode. I've been rewatching it a number of times over the last few days to figure out why I don't like it so much, and I think the conclusion I've come to is that Picard acts so openly, so emotional, so jovial. He's kind of like a happy uncle or like a kind grandparent, more than the Jean-Luc Picard who commanded the Enterprise. Now, in the present timeline, like I said earlier, Picard hasn't been in command of anything for quite some time. It's reasonable to expect that he's changed his sensibilities, except that when the opening scene takes place, it's 14 years ago, much closer to the Picard that we know and love from the TNG movies. The authoritative one, the aloof one, the one who keeps people at arm's length. In fact, the Kuat Milat matriarch, the nun, actually specifically and explicitly calls to this by saying something like, Picard doesn't like open displays of emotion, he doesn't like children. Yeah, I tend to agree with her. So why is he acting all grandpa-ish all of a sudden? It just didn't really jive with the character for me. Also in that scene is a young Elnor, a new character we were introduced to in episode 4 who will be joining the new crew. Look, it's early days yet, and I absolutely haven't made my mind up on this guy, but I was not a big fan of his first showing. Mostly it's because of, honestly, how he looks. He's like literally a Lord of the Rings elf transported to Star Trek. Now, before you start saying I'm being unreasonable, just hear me out here. The top knot, his hair, the sword, the robe, I know it's all meant to communicate that he's part of this pseudo-religious order, this order of nuns, or in his case, a girl, boy, male priest nun. But he just doesn't look like he belongs in Star Trek. Am I crazy for saying that? Elnor makes a comment that when you fight one like him, the outcome is not in doubt, meaning that you'll die. Although I don't see how that's possible when this guy's walking around with a damn sword and people have phasers and disruptors at the ready. That's just me though. Now in this video, we haven't yet talked about what happened at the Borg Cube, and that's because in episode 4, not a lot does happen there. There was one thing, though, that I really didn't like, and that was the romantic comedy skating scene. It's the scene where Narek takes Soji to a secret place in the derelict Borg cube, and they go sliding around on their socks in a romantic comedy montage. Am I supposed to feel like heartfelt for these two young lovers experiencing this moment of joy in what is literally a horror movie set, and then seconds later interrogating each other for information? Look, it's not the end of the world or anything, I just didn't think the scene worked at all. Two very quick things I wasn't a huge fan of. No Hugh this episode. They set him up so nicely last time in episode 3, and I want to see more. Seems like his character has really evolved in a logical way since his appearance in the TNG episode Descent, and I was eager to see more from him. And secondly, we got another F-bomb, this time from Captain Rios. Look, this is Star Trek, they don't swear that much. One or two in the course of an entire series, fine. But two in as many episodes? That's a bit much. There are a million shows out there that thrive on violence, sexual content, and a ton of swearing. And there's nothing wrong with that, it's totally cool. I love Game of Thrones too. But this isn't that. This is Star Trek. If we begin to erode the things, even little things like this, that make Star Trek, we're gonna come out the other end of this series with something that, no matter how good the show is, isn't proper Trek. And that's not something I want to see happen. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are you somewhere in the middle? Drop me a comment and let me know, and I will see you next week on the Battle Bridge.